as the wagon's coming down the home, cotton home, cotton come. I'm singing it.
All right, so the last presentation I did was about how Reconstruction came to an end. The Compromise of 1877, the deal that was reached where the Republicans would get the White House in exchange for that the Democrats were able to get the Reconstruction, the military occupation of the South would end. And the other thing that came out of that, or we looked at causes behind it, that people were tired of paying for it, people were tired of it, period. That there were several other elements involved in that. There was an economic meltdown that took people's attention. So we looked at the end of it. What I want to do today is look at the results of the white takeover of the South, the end of the Republican South, that coalition of former slaves and Southern Republicans, both carpetbaggers and scalawags, and what happened under the Democratic Solid South. All right, so what you're looking at there is probably the photo of the idea of the return of the Solid South and white home rule and redemption. You've got two water fountains there, one marked white and one marked colored. And although any rational person looking at this today is going to look at that and say those are not equal, that's not what the 14th Amendment is about. We're going to look at how the South was able to rationalize this system, this what they called Jim Crow, the entire system of segregation. The nickname for that was Jim Crow. Now, where that name exactly comes from and how it got attached to this is a bit of a mystery. What we do know is that Jim Crow was a minstrel show character. Um, Minstrel shows are where white actors would dress up in blackface and act in very kind of racist, stereotypical ways. And so one of the minstrel show characters was called Jim Crow. And so that's where this name comes from. But if you hear Jim Crow segregation, it is the entire system of racial segregation involving bathrooms, water fountains, restaurants, hotels, you name it, any place where there was any kind of segregation. That's all Jim Crow segregation. And one of the questions that has to be asked then is what could be done to end this? This seems to fly in the face of what Lincoln said this war was about. Is there any way to undo the fact that Reconstruction has been undone? Let's assume for a second that you're this young gentleman in this drinking fountain and you decide, you know what, that one over there looks a lot better than the one that by the sign I'm supposed to be drinking from. I'll just go over there to the one that's marked white. What would happen? Well, if you were African American and you tried to challenge the system, if you were lucky, it just involved you having a burning cross on your front yard or, some sort of physical violence against you. But more than likely, what was going to happen is that the Klan or some other group of whites were going to drag you out of your home and kill you. I know you guys did To Kill a Mockingbird last year in your freshman English classes, and although that's a work of fiction, that's not really just a complete invention of a flight of fancy here. That's reality. So what could be done to challenge the system? Well, if he also decided, I'll take this to court. Well, the judge is going to be white. The jury is going to probably be all white because jury pools are drawn from pools of registered voters. And as we looked at last time together, we saw how, although the 15th Amendment is not specifically overturned, all the teeth are pulled out of it, and systems designed like poll taxes and literacy tests to keep African Americans from voting. So you're going to have a white judge, a white jury, and good luck trying to find a lawyer that would argue your case. Atticus Finch is a fictional character. Try to find a real Atticus Finch.
2479A.
One time where it is tested in the courts is by that gentleman right there, Homer Plessy. This is a test case. Homer Plessy decides that he's going to challenge Jim Crow segregation in the courts. It's Louisiana law is what's at issue here. In Louisiana law, railroad cars had to be segregated. So he is going to try and test this in court. How's he able to do that? Well, Homer Plessy is 1/8 black. He has one great grandparent who was African American. And under Louisiana law, that actually made him African American. Some states kept track of this down to 1/64th, so that would be your great great grandparents, and then depending on the racial mix there, you might be considered African. He's 1/8 black, but they considered him black under Louisiana law. He can pass, to use the terminology of the day. That meant you could pass for being white. And so what he does is he buys a ticket.
All staff, the listening tour will be in the library today. If you're interested, Dr. Ridgeway will be in the building today for the listening tour. She sent out an email last night. If you're interested, so during your prep and lunch, if you're interested, it is optional, it's not required. So the listening tour will be in the library all day today. Thank you.
All right. So what he does is he buys a ticket on the white part of the train because the ticket agent, he looks like a white guy. So again, pass was the terminology. And so Plessy buys the ticket and then really pulls a Rosa Parks. He goes on the white train and then informs the conductor that I'm black under Louisiana law and I shouldn't be here, but I'm not going to go anywhere, which then leads to a court case. Like I said, he's pulling a Rosa Parks here, some 60 years before she did. His case is going to be a test case. It's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And what does the Supreme Court rule in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision? It's one of the most famous Supreme Court decisions in its history. And remember that one of the reasons why that matters is that Supreme Court decisions are going to stick. Here's a good example of that. This Supreme Court decision is going to be the law of the land for 58 years. It's going to survive all kinds of different presidencies and different Congress makeups. It's going to go from 1896 to the Brown decision in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. So the Plessy decision was this, that Homer Plessy, as a 1/8 black man, had no right to be on the white car. And the law, the rule that is established coming out of this is the separate but equal doctrine. The Supreme Court ruled that segregation, Jim Crow segregation, was legal, did not violate the 14th Amendment. And what they said was, as long as the facilities are equal, then that it was going to be constitutionally accepted. Now, if you go back to our drinking fountain example, are those equal? Really depends on who's making the decision, doesn't it? They're both drinking fountains. They both give you water if you're thirsty, but if you're looking at it in any kind of rational way, you can see that one is clearly superior to the other. But again, if you're the young kid in that photo or the gentleman in that photo, if you want to fight it, you're going to take it to a court that's dominated by the white race. So are you going to win? No. And if you tried to fight it, if you tried to take the case to court, that was a way that the Klan was going to show up at your house. And so the creation of Jim Crow segregation is ruled to be constitutional by the Supreme Court in 1896. They create what we know as de jure segregation, segregation in law. What they said in the decision was that it doesn't particularly aim at one race. That it and the decision actually says that if African Americans feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens as a result of Jim Crow segregation, it's their own fault. That's what the decision says. It's actually hard to believe that that's in there. Um, why would the Supreme Court rule that way? White supremacist on the Supreme Court. So all of the actual meaning of the 14th Amendment is taken away with the Plessy decision. If this is how you're going to define what is equal treatment under the law, it has no meaning whatsoever. Now, the 14th Amendment is important today because the courts have actually stuck behind it and really went with what it was meant to be. But for 58 years, the 14th Amendment is essentially irrelevant, as is the 15th Amendment. So those gains that were made under Reconstruction for social and political equality evaporate as a result of things that we looked at, like the poll tax and the literacy test and the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. And so Jim Crow segregation then becomes the law of the land. And one of the things that I say there is that photos and just the description of Jim Crow segregation doesn't cover the whole story. And again, that's one of the advantages of teaching this as a sophomore class as opposed to a freshman class. You guys have already covered To Kill a Mockingbird. And so you've, again, it was a work of fiction, but you kind of got to wrap your head around that. African Americans are expected to be differential to whites, defer to them, to act submissive under the Jim Crow system, to the point of destroying any chance of equality. If you're African American, you have to call a white man sir. Even if you're 50 years old and you're talking to a 10-year-old kid, you still have to call him sir. If you're African American and you meet somebody on the sidewalk that is white, you had to step into the street. And especially African American men had to show particularly deference to white women. Any kind of show of anything equality towards white women, well, I'm sure if you guys did To Kill a Mockingbird, that you at least talked about Emmett Till. If not, we will. But if you have misplaced that case in your memory, Emmett Till was the kid from Chicago that didn't understand how the Jim Crow system worked and had the temerity, under their view of things, to either whistle at or say "Hey, baby" to a white woman, and for that the woman's husband and brother-in-law beat Emmett Till to death in such a way that his body was hardly recognizable. And then the court case was a complete sham. Everybody knew that those two guys had killed Emmett Till, and the lawyer in the closing arguments just says, you white guys on the jury aren't going to vote to convict two white men for killing a black kid, are you? And of course the answer was no. So Emmett Till's murder is no justice for that whatsoever. If you were black and you tried to challenge the system, that last slide is not easy to look at, but I do want you to see what the result was. what you're looking at is the photo of a lynching. And there were 3,000 lynchings of African Americans from 1890 to 1920. And if you do the math, that's about 2 a week for 30 years. It wasn't that consistent, but about 2 a week for 30 years. And the other reason why I picked that photo in particular is it's clear in looking at the photograph that none of the white faces are worried about anything that might happen to them for participating in this. They're actually facing towards the camera. Some of them look like they're couples, like you brought your date to the lynching. There's no shame there. They're not trying to hide their faces. They know that they're not going to get in trouble with the law for what's happened here. And so, putting a final touch on it, Reconstruction then is clearly an example of what might have been and missed opportunities and a chance to really change American society. And all of those things go by the board. It's going to take another 60 years before anything close to what Lincoln set out to do with that third goal for Reconstruction could even be talked about as a reality.
Boys, the wagon's coming down to haul the cotton home. Come, cotton, come, I'm picking it by the pound. Boys, the wagon's coming down to haul the cotton home. Come, cotton, come, I'm picking it by the pound. Boys, the wagon's coming down to haul the cotton home. Come, cotton, come, I'm picking it by the pound. Boys, the wagon's coming down to haul the cotton home. Come, cotton, come, I'm picking it by the pound. Led old Billy up to the rack, beat him across the head till the captain got back. I'm picking it by the pound. Boys, the wagon's coming down, haul the cotton home. Come, cotton, come, I'm picking it by the pound. Led old Billy to the water trough. He wouldn't drink water and he wouldn't walk off. I'm picking it by the pound. Boys, the wagon's coming down to haul the cotton.